The first part of what we're going to do today is actually just repeating of what we did yesterday. Since we did it yesterday, we're going to do it real fast. So in order to turn a decimal into the fraction, what's the first thing we need to do? It's the same thing we did in the opener today. We want to change a decimal into a fraction. The first thing we do is find the place value, right? So first thing we do is determine the place value of the last digit in the decimal. Last digit meaning the one farthest to the right. After we determine the place value, then we're going to write the fraction. What goes on top of the fraction? When I'm writing my fraction, what's going to go on top? The decimal without the decimal, and what goes on the bottom? The place value, right? And then the last thing we do, we had to do it in all three problems in the opener. After we write the fraction, we need to check to see if we can reduce. And remember, when we reduce, we're always going to be able to reduce by what? By 2 or 5. And if you can't reduce by 2 or 5, then that means you're not going to be able to reduce at all. All right, and that's because the bottom number is going to be a factor of 10, and so we're going to be able to reduce by 2 or 5, which are both factors of 10. So let's do a couple of examples here. So on your other sheet of paper, where it says fractions, decimals, and percents practice, this is example 1 under turning decimals into fractions. So on this example here, the first thing we need to do is determine the place value of the last digit. What is the last digit here? It's that 4, right? What is the place value of that 4? That's the thousandths place. So right off the bat, we know that the bottom of our fraction, the denominator, is going to be what? 1,000. And what's going to go on top? 204, right? Now, we don't need this 0. When we get rid of the decimal, this 0 can go away. Why do we need to keep this 0 in the middle here? What would happen if I got rid of this 0? Carl? It would be 24, right? So we need to keep this 0 here so that the 2 stays in the hundreds place. All right, that 2 needs to be worth 100, so we're going to put the 2 in the hundreds place by putting the 0 in the tens place. All right, now, once I write the fraction, what do I need to do? If I can. See if we can reduce it by 2 or 5, right? Can we reduce by 2? Yeah. Yes, they're both even, so we can reduce by 2. Go ahead and use your calculator for that. 204 divided by 2 is 102. And 1,000 divided by 2 is 500. Are we done? No, we can reduce by what? 2 again. And this time, 102 divided by 2 is 51. And 500 divided by 2 is 250. Can I reduce that one? No. The top number is not divisible by 2. It's not divisible by 5, which means that we are done. All right, next one we have 1.50. I'm actually going to do this one a couple of different ways. This one's a little bit different, and we'll talk about why in a second. Go ahead and give it a try on your own first. All right, so following the directions that were given in our notes, we're going to start by looking at the place value of the last digit. What is the place value of this last digit here? What is the place value? It's the hundredths place. So our fraction is going to have 100 in the denominator, and what's it going to have in the numerator? 150. All right, now we'll start reducing. We'll reduce by 2 and 5, so can we reduce by 2? Yeah. Yep, all right, so we'll start with the 2. Reduce by 2, 150 divided by 2 is 75, and 100 divided by 2 is 50. All right, can I reduce by 2 again?
No.
No, but what can I reduce by? I can reduce by 5, okay, so we'll reduce by 5. When I do that, on top, 75 divided by 5? 75 divided by 5. And 50 divided by 5 is 10. Are we done yet? No, we can reduce by what? 5 again. Both of these numbers end in a 5 or a 0. So 15 divided by 5 gives us 3, and 10 divided by 5 gives us 2. Are we done yet? Yes. Now, I want you to look back at this step right here. We had 150 over 100. What would have been an easier way to reduce that? We're going to go back and do this another way, but what would have been an easier way to reduce this one, Carl?
What I did was I crossed out the 0.
So since both of these numbers end in 0, what are they both divisible by?
5.
Well, they're both divisible by 5, but there's a bigger number that every number that ends in 0 is divisible by 5, but also 10, right? So we could have, if we wanted to, reduce by 10 right off the bat and get 15 over 10, and that would have saved us an extra step. All right, then we would still have to reduce by 5. Now, let's go back to the very beginning. When I'm at the beginning here, there's actually a part of this number that's not really necessary, that doesn't change the value of it. What number here, what decimal doesn't really change anything? The 0, right? So we could actually go all the way back to the beginning here and say this 0 is not necessary. And just use the place value of this one. What's the place value of that 5? 10. So that means that we're going to have, the place value is tenths. So that means that we're going to have a 10 in the denominator and 15 in the numerator. And then what do we need to do? Reduce by 5. When we reduce this by 5, we get 15 divided by 5 is 3, 10 divided by 5 is 2, and we get the same answer we got the other way. So if you have a 0 at the end of a decimal, that 0 doesn't really change anything. We can just ignore it. All right, now it's okay if we don't. We got the same answer using the hundredths place as we did with the tenths place, but it was just a little bit more work to get there. So now moving on to the new stuff. Now we want to convert a fraction into a decimal. So we're back on the guide sheet. We're going to write down the notes on how to do this. If we have a fraction and we want to turn it into a decimal, we actually talked about this yesterday. It was how we checked our work yesterday. How do you change a fraction into a decimal? What does a fraction actually mean? If we have something like 3 over 5, what does that mean?
Divide.
It means division, right? So to change a fraction into a decimal, we're just going to divide the top number by the bottom number. In this case, we would do 3 divided by 5. So in order to turn a fraction into a decimal, divide the numerator by the denominator. And you can just punch that into your calculator. All right, so let's do a couple examples. 4 over 5. Now, we're going to ask you to show us what you're actually typing into the calculator. So when you get a problem like 4 over 5, we're going to ask you to write down exactly what you type into the calculator. So on your notes, you'll want to put the fraction 4 over 5, but then we're going to write that's equal to 4 divided by 5 before we write the answer. So this step right here is just showing us that you know how to get this using a calculator. So you're going to write 4 divided by 5, and then once you do that, you're going to put another equal sign. Remember, we always want to separate our steps with equal signs, right? So we're going to put another equal sign and then put what the calculator gave us. So when you type 4 divided by 5 in your calculator, what do you get?
0.8.
0.8. That's a decimal, right?
Yeah.
So we went from a fraction to a decimal, and we showed how we got it. We put the 4 divided by 5 there to show our work, and that's it. All right, next example. Example 2, we've got 21 over 25. We want to convert that to a decimal. So again, we're going to use our calculator, and what are we going to type into our calculator? 21 divided by 25. So I'm going to put an equal sign, 21 divided by 25, and that equals whatever the calculator gave us, 0.84. That's pretty easy, right? We are going to ask that you show that step. This step here just shows us that you know how to get it. It shows us that you're using a calculator without a fraction button on it, because you could just type in a fraction and use the fraction button to get the decimal. So we want to see this step in there. And don't forget those equal signs to show that this is equal to this, which is equal to this. So they're all equal to each other. The rest of the conversions that we're going to do are going to involve percents. All right, so the first thing I want to do is talk about what percent actually means. The word percent literally means what? Anybody know? Can anybody tell me what per means? So per means out of. And what about cent? Like how many cents are in a dollar? Or how many years in a 1 cent in a dollar?
100.
1 penny in a dollar?
They're 100.
There's 100 pennies in a dollar, right? So there's 100 cents in a dollar. How many years in a century?
100.
100, right? Anytime you see that cent prefix, or in this case it's a suffix, or it's actually the root word, I guess, here. Anytime you see that cent, it's going to mean 100. So percent means out of 100. As far as math operations go, out of means what? So does out of mean we're going to add or subtract or multiply or divide? Somebody said it? Divide. Out of means we're going to divide. So if something's out of 100, that means we're dividing by 100. All right, so anytime we see percent, it actually means out of 100 or divided by 100. So if I want to turn a decimal into a percent, now keep in mind here that we have a decimal and we want to change it to a percent. Percent means out of 100 or divided by 100, but this is what we're going to. So we have to figure out what we started with, what the decimal is, or how we get from a decimal to a percent. So if we have a decimal, we want to change it to a percent. Anybody know what we do? So if you have a decimal like 0.25 and we want that to be a percent, what are we going to do? So since percent means out of 100, everything we do with percents is going to have something to do with 100. In this case, when we have a decimal, we want to change it to a percent, we're going to multiply by 100. Now there's a shortcut to it. If you multiply by 100, that's the same thing as moving the decimal, well, one way or the other. So if I'm multiplying by 100, is the number going to get bigger or smaller? If I multiply by 100.
Bigger.
It's going to get bigger, right? So to make the number bigger, by multiplying by 100, we're going to move the decimal 2 places to the right or to the left? To the right. So it's the same thing as moving the decimal 2 places to the right. All right, so let's look at a few examples here. Another thing before we do the examples, don't forget the percent symbol. So when we convert something into a percent, we need to be sure to show that it is a percent by putting the percent symbol there. So what does the percent symbol look like? Like that, right? So don't forget on your answers, when your answer is a percent, you need to show that it's a percent. So don't forget that percent symbol. All right, so here's an example. We have 0.24. We want to change it to a percent. All right, there's 2 ways we can do this. I'm going to do it both ways. The first way is we just multiply by 100. So to change this to a percent, this is going to equal 0.24 times 100. It's really times 100%. And what's 0.24 times 100? Type that into your calculator. What do you get? 24. And don't forget that percent symbol. So we get 24%. The other way to do it is if we start with 0.24, we take this decimal point right here and we move it 2 places to the right. So we move it 1, 2 to the right, which means it's going to be after the 4. So now the percent that we're going to get is 24, and then the decimal is here, but if the decimal is after the 4, do I need it?
No.
No, we don't need that decimal point there since it's after the 4. So I can get rid of that. All right, so either way I do it, by moving the decimal 2 places to the right, which puts it after the 4, and we get 24, or by multiplying by 100, I get the same answer. All right, example 2, we have 1.5. We want to change this to a percent. So again, I'm going to do this 2 ways here. The first one is I'm going to take 1.5 and multiply it by 100. Really multiplying by 100%. That's going to get the percent symbol on there also. What is 1.5 times 100? 150. You can just use your calculator for that. And don't forget the percent on there. Now, if I want to do this one the other way, if I start with 1.5 and I move the decimal 2 places to the right, I run into a little bit of a problem. There's my decimal. I move it 1 place to the right, it's after the 5. I need to move it another place to the right. And what's the problem that I have here? There's no number there, right? What number can I put there?
0.
0. So if I need more places, I can put a 0 in here. And so now the decimal is going to be after this 0. When I move it 2 places to the right, then I get what? 150. And then again, don't forget that percent symbol. Back to the guide. This time we want to turn a percent into a decimal. So we just turned a decimal into a percent by multiplying by 100. So if we want to go the other way and change a percent into a decimal, what do we need to do? Divide by 100, exactly. Remember, percent means out of 100. So this time if we have a percent, if we have something like 50%, that means 50 divided by 100, or 50 out of 100. So we're going to divide by 100, which is the same thing as moving the decimal 2 places to the left. Should I put the percent symbol in my answer on this one?
Yeah.
Is my answer going to be a percent?
No.
No, the answer is not a percent. The answer is going to be a decimal, so there should not be a percent symbol on it. All right, so our first example with changing a percent into a decimal. If I have 40% and I want to change that into a decimal, remember, what does the percent mean? When I say 40%, percent means out of 100, right? So 40 out of 100 means 40 divided by 100. Again, we're going to show that. We need to make sure that we show what we're typing into our calculator. So if we're going to use the calculator, I'm going to write down 40 divided by 100 first, and then I'm going to write what I get when I punch it into the calculator. What do I get? 40 divided by 100 is 0.4.
Do I include the percent after the 40?
Now, there's a shortcut to this. It's the same shortcut as we had when we were converting from a decimal to a percent, except instead of moving the decimal to the right, we're going to move the decimal to the left. So if I start with 40% and I want to change that to a decimal, I'm going to move the decimal place 2 places to the left. Now, I don't see a decimal there. If there's no decimal here, where is it? There's always a decimal somewhere. We just don't always see it. Where is it? So the options are, the decimal could be here, before the 4. It could be between the 4 and the 0. Or it could be between or after the 0. Alright, so what I'm asking is, 40 is the same thing as 40 point something, or 4.0, or something 0.4. Which one is the same thing as 40? This one, right? So if there's no decimal, it goes after the ones place. Remember, the decimal is always right after the ones place. So if we're going to do this by moving the decimal, I want everybody to do it both ways so that you have it in your notes. If we're going to do this by moving the decimal, we're going to put the decimal in after the ones place, to the right of the ones place. And then we're going to move it which way? To the left how many times? 2 times. All right, so we're going to take that decimal and move it left once, twice. And when I do that, I'm going to get the decimal, and then the 4, and then the 0. Now, I don't like this answer for 2 reasons. One of them is there's a 0 in there we don't need. Why don't we need that 0? Why do we not need this 0 anymore? I needed it here when it was the 40, because if I didn't have the 0, then it would just make it a 4, and that's different. But why don't I need the 0 here? So this 0 here doesn't change the value of anything. If you remember when we were doing the decimals to fractions earlier, we had the 1.50 and we said we don't need that 0 at the end. So this 0 here is not necessary, so we want to get rid of it. We don't want any zeros at the end of a number after the decimal. All right, now, we do want a 0 somewhere. We haven't talked about this yet, but we always want to make sure there's something in the ones place. And there's a few reasons for this. The main one is we want to make sure that we know where the decimal is. And if we put a decimal here, it's maybe sometimes easy to miss, and so we might think this is just the number 4. So we always want to make sure that we put a 0 in the ones place if there's nothing there. So our answer then is going to be 0.4. When you punch stuff into your calculator, it's always going to do this for you. It's going to put that 0 in front of the decimal for you. All right, so if you get an answer like 0.4 or point anything, and there's nothing before the decimal, we're going to put a 0 in there. All right, back on the, oh, I'm sorry, got another example here. 3.7%. We want to change that into a decimal. So again, there's two ways we can do it. Remember, percent means what? Out of 100. So 3.7% means 3.7 out of 100 or divided by 100. Type that into your calculator. What do you get? 0.037. All right, do I need this 0 here? Yes. Why do I need this 0? Because we always want something in the ones place. So if nothing else is there, then we're going to keep that 0 there. Do I need this 0 here?
No.
Yes.
No?
No.
So if I get rid of this, 0.37 is the same thing as 0.037?
Yes.
No, they're not the same because this, remember, this is the 10th place, this is the 100th place. So if we get rid of this 0 here, all of a sudden this 3 is going to move from the 100th place to the 10th place, which means it's going to be, instead of 3 pennies, it's going to mean 3 dimes. All right, we can't get rid of this 0 here because it needs to hold that place value. So anything between a number and the decimal we need to keep because that's holding a place value that's important. So we do need to keep both of those zeros in there, and that's going to be our answer. All right, doing this by moving the decimal point, we have 3.7%. Remember, this time we're moving the decimal 2 places to the left. So we're going to take this decimal here and move it left 2 times. And we are running into a problem that we had before, but now we know how to fix it, right? So we move it left once and we're fine, but we move it left again and there's nothing in here. So what can I put in there?
0.
0. So when I do this, I get the decimal here, and what else am I going to do? I'm going to need another something in there that I need to add in. Yes, I need another 0. So if I just leave it like I have it, it's going to be 0.037, but we want to put something in the ones place also, so we're going to put that 0 there. And we get the same answer by moving the decimal as we did just by dividing by 100. Either way is perfectly fine. If we want to turn a percent into a fraction, so we start with a percent, we want to change it into a fraction. Remember, percent means what? Out of 100. When we change the percent into a decimal, we just divide it by 100, right? Well, what's a way of showing that we're going to divide by 100 but using a fraction? Instead of saying, if we had 40%, instead of saying 40 divided by 100, we could say 40 over 100, right? So out of 100 means we divide by 100, but remember, division is the same thing as just making a fraction with whatever we're dividing by in the denominator. So we're going to write a fraction with a percent in the numerator and 100 in the denominator. Anytime we get a fraction as an answer, what do we always need to do with it? If we can. We need to simplify if we can. So we're always going to reduce when we can. And just like when we had the decimals, when we're going to have 100 in the denominator, all you really need to check is if you can reduce by 2 or 5. Since it ends in a 0, you can just check to see if it reduces by 2 or 5, and just make sure you reduce completely and you should be good. So our first example, 35%. Since 35% means 35 out of 100, how can I write this as a fraction? What goes on top?
35.
35. What goes on the bottom? 100. Now what do I need to do? If I can? Reduce. Can I reduce by 2? Can I reduce by 5?
Yes.
Yes. Reduce by 5. 35 divided by 5 is 7. 100 divided by 5 is 20. Next one, we have 72%. So again, 72% means 72 out of 100. So what's the fraction going to look like? 72 over 100. And can I reduce this one by 2? Yeah, they're both even. So reduce by 2, and we get 36 over 50. Are we done? Nope, they're still both even, right? So we reduce by 2 again. We get 36 divided by 2? 18. And 50 divided by 2? 25. Can I reduce again? 18's even, right? Yeah, but 25 isn't. So we're done. if we have a fraction, we want to turn it into a percent. So if we have a fraction like 4/5 and we want to change it into a percent, we already know what to do because we know how to change a fraction into a decimal, right? How do you change a fraction into a decimal? Divide, right? Top number by the bottom number. So we're going to change it into a decimal first by dividing. And then after we turn it into a decimal, we can turn the decimal into a percent by multiplying by 100. So we're going to divide the top number by the bottom number, and then we're going to multiply by 100, which is the same thing as multiplying by 2. So to turn a fraction into a percent, we're really just going to do the fraction and change it into a decimal, and then we're going to take that decimal and turn it into a percent. So we're just going to do stuff that we've already done here. Sorry. So let's say we took a quiz. We got 3 questions right out of the 4 questions on the quiz. We want to know what our percent is. What we're going to do is we're going to change this fraction into a decimal first. So how do I change 3/4 into a decimal? 3 divided by 4. So I'm going to write down 3 divided by 4. And if you want, you can do all of this in one step. So after I do 3 divided by 4, then I'm going to change it into a percent by doing what? What's the second step? Multiply by 100, right? So we're going to do 3 divided by 4, and then we're going to multiply by 100. Okay, and really it's 100%. I'm going to put that percent symbol on there so I don't forget it later. So 3 divided by 4 gives us 0.75, but then we multiply by 100 and get 75, and don't forget the percent. Notice that we're doing a bunch of stuff with percents here, but we're never using that percent button on the calculator. Okay, the percent button on the calculator does stuff with percents, but we know how to do it on our own, so we're not going to use that button. Okay, it doesn't really make anything easier for us, so we're not going to use that. So again, make sure you're showing your work. Make sure that you show that you're changing it to a decimal by dividing and then changing it to a percent by multiplying by 100. Make sure you put equal signs between your steps and box your answer. One more. So this time on the quiz, you got 7 right out of 8, which is better than 3 out of 4, right? So let's see what the percent is this time. So we're going to change it to a decimal first by doing what? 7 divided by 8. And then we're going to multiply by 100. And when I do that, I get what? 87.5. And what am I missing? The percent symbol. So even though this is a percent, it has a decimal point in it. Is that okay? Yeah. So even though this is a percent, it can have a decimal in your answer. And we're going to leave that decimal there.